Elephant.
Okay, hello everyone. This is a data-driven chat, and today I'm very happy to introduce Luisa Orsini, who is a senior lecturer in Biosystems and Environmental Change at the University of Birmingham. She's also a Turing Fellow and has a lot of other very cool awards. I will let her kind of talk about what she does in a second. So, hi Luisa.
Hi, Ghana. Good to see you.
Yeah, nice talking to you. So, can you tell us how did you become interested in biosystems and environmental change? What has driven you to this topic?
Yeah, let's see. Since a young age, I've been fascinated by the beauty and complexity of natural ecosystems. And to be honest, I started as an oceanographer. So I was looking at the physical environment and its complex dynamics. And then during my PhD, I discovered the biotic dynamics. And so the biodiversity, the interactions in a natural environment determined by species, by genes, and by genomes. And so I looked at this diversity through the lenses of genetics and later genomics. And then I spent the rest of my research career trying to understand how these two words interact. And so how environmental change, which is more a biotic change, alters the evolution of biotic components of ecosystems, which I can summarize as a biodiversity. Why am I interested in all these? First of all, it's fascinating to understand the mystery of evolution and what drives changes. And secondly, I've always been driven by solutions. So what can we do to maintain and recover natural ecosystems, which we are losing at a free fall rate? You can think scarily in the last 20 years, biodiversity has declined 1,000 times the natural rate. And why do we care? It's not just we're losing a good, but drastic decline in biodiversity has also led to a decline in ecosystem services. Actually, 60% of ecosystem services have been lost in the last 50 years because of biodiversity. And when I talk about ecosystem services, this includes provisioning, regulating, supporting, and even cultural services. So why am I driven to these? My interest is really in understanding how we can help nature recover itself, because both humans and environmental health depend on the environment.
Can I just follow up a little bit on what you just said? And I know that there are some proposals, at least in several countries. Well, I heard these proposals, for example, in Singapore and Australia, at some point, where people were proposing to make kind of libraries of biodiversity. Is that something that you were thinking about? Is that something that is that a prevalent thought in the UK? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, funny you ask. One of my main research lines is working on biological archives of species that can be resurrected. And they represent a fantastic resource to understand how evolution operates through time and in response to the environment. Some of these historical variants of species could be actually used to restore current ecosystems, but unless we stop the reasons why these ecosystems decay, there will be not enough energy left in biodiversity, if you want, to go back to the original state. And what my research has shown in many cases is that ecosystems might not return to the original state ever. However, we can help nature to heal so that the same ecosystem services can be delivered. And when I talk about services, I talk about delivery of clean water, food provisioning, climate regulation, even just going out in nature and enjoying a day by the lake. That's a service we enjoy. So all this can be restored if we help nature to do that.
apart from being biosystems and environmental change, senior lecturer in this topic, you're also a Turing Fellow. And for those people who do not know what Turing Institute is, so the Alan Turing Institute in the UK is a National Center of Excellence for Data Science. So I think many people do not realize that biosystems and biodiversity and environmental change is related to data science. So can you explain the connection for people who do not know what the connection is?
Yeah, I can certainly try. So let's break it down in smaller pieces so it becomes obvious why we need data. And so the first thing to know is that we know for a fact biodiversity is a foundation of ecosystem functions and the services they deliver. And this, for example, just to give a practical examples, lakes or ponds regulate climate via temperature, but they also trap excess carbon from the atmosphere. So if we alter these ecosystems, then they can become a net source of greenhouse gases. So this is one piece of information. When we investigate the biotic component, we collect a large number of data. But then we also know, that's a second piece of information, biodiversity conservation and human health are intimately linked to environmental quality. So regardless of the growing evidence, intervention to reduce ecosystem services loss and to recover human and environmental health have failed. And the reason for this is in one simple expression, because it's complicated, but essentially is because links between changing environmental conditions and biodiversity are non-linear and context-dependent outcomes from processes operating over many years. And so all these changes are measured through a number of biotic and abiotic changes. And what this results in is a huge pile of data. So we measure all these things. We are able to characterize biotic and abiotic changes through time and space, but then we are left with so much data we don't know what we do with, unless we use data science and apply data science to make sense of it. So, for example, in my research, data science enables us to rank the environmental factors that cause loss of biodiversity. And in practice, what this allows us is to prioritize the environmental factors that need immediate action to restore biodiversity and achieve resilient ecosystems.
So that's incredibly interesting. Must be fascinating being able to work in this field. So can you tell me if you had to pick one thing that you have learned throughout your research that you are most proud of, what would it be?
Maybe the thing that makes me more proud is for me to be able to do something for society, so use my science to produce practical solutions. And this is what I am doing as part of my research, is not just understanding what the natural environment has to tell me, but how can I learn from it to propose solutions.
Right. So just to follow up on that, as someone who works on environmental change, do you have any tips for people how they can stay greener, lead a more sustainable life? I know that we're currently in a very strange situation, but let's just assume that we had kind of business as usual for now. So what can you do in everyday life to reduce the impact on the environment?
Well, everybody can do a little bit, and definitely small things like recycling, using public transport, using alternative energy. These are all important. Everybody contributes. However, I think that for us to make a real difference, we need to shift the way we think. I want to give an example. So Greta Thunberg, the teenager activist, this past year has given us a fantastic lesson. She put her mind to it, and she showed actually that she can move masses. She can influence policy. She can influence the economy. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think we need to do to make a difference. I don't honestly think that technology and science discovery are a limitation nowadays. We have enough clean technologies if we want to use them. What stops us from using them is political interest, is economic drive, and this shouldn't be our priority. Growth is important, but our health and environmental health are more important if we want to run this planet in the long range. So changing a mindset, changing how we deal with everyday life has to be at the core of how we deal with this crisis. And so what I also want to say is also easier for developed countries to say, oh, we shift to this kind of clean energy, but then we expect the Amazons are not burned down. Great. But what do we provide communities in the Amazon to avoid that they actually have to burn down the Amazon so that they can grow crop? So it has to be a global shift, the way we distribute resources, because if we keep depleting, I think we don't have a long way to go.
So currently we are in this very special situation, and in recent months we saw a huge environmental impact of COVID-19 in the sense that we have reduced level of pollution worldwide. So what is your take on this? Will this improvement be temporary or permanent? Let's just assume that eventually we will go back to normal. So we will have to come out of quarantine. And do you think that we will pollute even more, or like what is? I know that we are speculating at this stage, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, so I want to say the COVID-19 has been a wake-up call in many ways. It has and still has a huge impact on our lives, our health, our economy. But in a way, it has taught us something. If we return to business as usual, we will go down the same path we started before the COVID. It's interesting that with all has happened this past year, with fires in Australia, big climate events, none of us has ever thought of stopping and thinking, wait, we need to do something here. But COVID has stopped us, and in few months of less activity, we have seen a huge change in air pollution. So what this can teach us, besides the big losses we are facing, is we can actually make it happen. And so I know, and I'm pretty aware that progress cannot be stopped and shouldn't be. But do we actually need to have a yearly growth of 3.5%? Probably we don't need that much. Mm-hmm. We can shift to green economies. We can slow down the growth. We can probably distribute wealth in a more equal way. And this might help us coping also with other important issues like climate change. Because at the end of the day, climate change is destroying lives, goods, and people. So it's not much different from COVID. It's just that we don't see it the same way.
Right. So I just want to kind of also pick on what you said. And so as far as I understand the argument, there is quite a different argument, right, from developing countries and developed countries. So, for example, I think one of the reasons why, so at least this is my understanding, that why China is not participating in a lot of environmental change programs is because they're saying that, when the developed countries were developing, when they had the stages of development, they didn't have any restrictions, right? So we're just going to do whatever we need to do. because we're still developing, right? So what is your take on this? How can developing countries tackle this?
Yeah.
Or is it the same? Is it kind of the same argument that, you know, they probably do not need to grow at the rate that they're growing now?
Well, okay, so the argument that China has, it might be fair from a big point of view, right? It's like you were there 100 years ago, you did a mess of everything. Why are you now turning on me saying I should stop or I should slow down? This is true. However, our natural resources are limited and we are depleting them. Once they're gone, they don't come back. Unless we allow nature to recover, this will not happen. How can we help developing countries to meet their needs without depleting further resources or without polluting more? And that's where I think the global economy and politics have to shift. It's possible. We can provide them with alternative solutions that allow them to grow without polluting. And we can adopt the same technologies so that we are in a better place in 10 years down the line or 20 years down the line. Just to give you an example, there are developing countries are some of my one of my focus. And so when we generate biotechnology solutions for these countries, we put a lot of effort in making them not only sustainable, but also affordable, scalable, and possible for these countries. So it is possible to do that. You just have to think what is the need of people you are helping. So it doesn't really help to me that we just give them, it has happened for in many cases, like providing toilets to African populations. So we go in, we provide something and say, use it. Great. Have we asked them if that's their main need?
Is that what they need?
Probably we don't. They probably need something else first. And so that's what I'm saying. One of the things I'm doing with my research, I'm developing a decontamination biotechnology for wastewater, because wastewater is the source of many airborne disease, waterborne disease, contamination and pollution. And this really affects people's health, the workforce, their livelihood, and so on. But so if I would go in and say, I have a new solution for you, you have to build a huge industrial silos, and then you have to spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds for you to get there, they will look at me and say, you're out of this world. I can't afford this. But we are working with them to develop something they can retrofit in their infrastructure so that the expenses they have to face is limited, but the advantage they will get is huge. Because what I notice is that these populations are well aware, more than us, of what are the consequences of pollution. They just don't have enough resources to act.
Right. So can I also ask you one more follow-up question on that, on clean water? So we had some discussions recently with colleagues from India who basically mentioned that so currently, for example, we have this recommendation from the World Health Organization that we should wash our hands for 20 seconds at a time with soap. And the colleagues, or at least my colleagues from India, were saying that that's basically impossible in India because of water shortages. So are these things that you are working on, can they help, for example, countries like India to potentially tackle this? Because what I'm thinking is, like, if potentially you can clean contaminated water faster, maybe you could solve or partially solve this problem.
Yeah, and actually that's a fantastic question, because this is what we are aiming for. So we are working with countries like South Africa, Brazil, and potentially India in the near future, because their problem is water shortage, and the water they have is heavily contaminated. What they are aiming for is to improve water reuse so they can actually make use of their limited resources. And by doing that, by decontaminating wastewater and enabling water reuse, then you allow these populations to make best use of a very limited resource and also to keep healthy.
Great. So I know that you have already mentioned 2 projects that you are working on, but maybe you could tell us something that really keeps you awake at night. So what are you currently working on that is really exciting? And there are probably a lot of things.
Yeah.
Maybe just one more example.
Well,
give us.
One more example. I think there are two main things that roll back to what I said and link to what I said before. For me, is really, as a scientist, I feel a responsibility to return something to society. And so the 2 big projects I'm working on, besides the curiosity and scientific curiosity behind them, there is also the big push of using them, translating them to meet people need. And so one of them is this decontamination biotechnology solution that you would be surprised, but uses a small crustacean as a biological agent to absorb, concentrate, and remove all persistent contaminants that all the fantastic turbines, a big engineering structure we have, do not manage to do. And it works, again, uses nature and uses the beauty of nature to solve a problem we have created by cleaning intractable large volumes of contaminated water into recyclable small biomass. And this has huge applications in developing countries. And this is what makes me excited, especially because then my science can translate to help real problems.
That sounds really exciting. So at the end, I ask this question basically everyone that I have been interviewing. So I normally ask people to provide a suggestion for 1 book and 1 film. So if you had to pick 1 book that you can recommend people to read and 1 film that you could recommend people to watch, what would they be? You can only pick 1 of each. That's the only restriction.
All right, that's a tough one. Maybe one the book is a classic, is War and Peace by Tolstoy. It was a heavy book. I read it as a teenager, but really changed my perception of life. And what surprised me is that it was written more than 2 centuries ago, but its philosophical analysis of humanity is still very actual. It's like on one side, humans evolve, but on the other, they tend to return to the same mistakes over and over again. So it's a book I would recommend for the philosophical understanding of humans and their complex behavior. And to make it lighter, on the other side, as a movie, maybe Madagascar, the first one, the one that came out first. I laughed so hard when I watched it. And the funny part is the animals are assigned human phobias and obsessions and characters, and makes you think how busy everyday life makes you lose sight of what matters really. And it feels so actual now with the COVID, where you are forced to think what's important in your life. And this is often your family, your friends, the network around you. And this is way more important than any other good you want to acquire. And so in a way, it is a funny movie, but it's also very actual in teaching us what really matters in life.
Awesome. Thank you so much for these suggestions. I think I need to reread definitely War and Peace. That would be great. I think because I have a 3-year-old son, we recently watched Madagascar. Yeah, so I also agree it's really nice. So thank you so much, Luisa. Thank you for talking to me today. And good luck with all the research that you're doing. It sounds really important and very, very interesting.
Thank you for giving me the chance to talk about this. Thanks very much.